as you develop these practices, you're investing in that higher self in a way that you aren't necessarily sure when it's going to come into play. And that's in the court, in the moment. A term I've heard before in sports like flow state. It's when you are being your leadership, being used by those practices. Yeah. And to me, that's really the highest execution of leadership, is that moment.
Welcome to Empowering Leadership, a podcast from Dorrier Underwood. Join us as we explore new perspectives on leadership and discover what it takes to be effective as a leader. Here's your host, Doug McVadon.
Join me and my guest, Danny Skinner of the Minnesota Street Project, and we'll talk about how a traumatic event can lead to a breakthrough in your leadership. My guest today on the Empowering Leadership podcast is Danny Skinner. Danny, it's so good to see you.
Hi, Doug. It's great to be with you.
Yes, and you know, we can start so many places in our conversation. Our love of music and, all kinds of interesting cultural things. But, the place that we're going to start this conversation is right with the topic of empowering leadership, which, as you know, can be thought of as a leader being empowering to his or her people on the one hand, or, we've talked about where we first met at the Crow Museum of Asian Art in Dallas. We talked about empowering leadership in the other direction. What could the staff do to empower the leaders in that organization? But, as we were talking, it became clear there's a third sense of empowering leadership, right? Which is, what does one do to empower one's own leadership?
Right.
And you have some thoughts on that. Is that an area that you find yourself right now?
It's an area I find myself all the time, but especially now. Yes, I spend a lot of time thinking about my own leadership as it relates within myself and sort of externally outside of myself. And I'll leave it at that for now. Because we'll dig into it. We'll ideate on that as we go.
That's exactly right. And so, let's just let people know a little bit about why we're together at all, which is that my company, Dorrier Underwood, was working with your organization there in Dallas. Just say a little bit about that.
Yes, working with Amy Hoffland at the Crow Collection of Asian Art in Dallas. Now the Crow Collection of Asian Art at the University of Texas of Dallas.
Yes.
And Dorrier Underwood was brought in to coach us on leadership, teach us about visioning, teach us about declaring our future, and had a huge impact on both that organization and all of the individual leaders.
And what was your role there? Just say a few things about your role.
At the time, I believe I was our collections manager, maybe. I've held so many roles there. And over the course of about somewhere between 3 and 5 years of working with Dorrier Underwood, I went on to become the deputy director of the whole organization. And filling in a few stop gaps on the way, director of exhibitions, director of content, several other positions, actually. But mostly working with Amy, working on our vision.
Yes.
Working on leadership.
And I want to talk about some of your breakthrough moments on that journey, because if I'm hearing you the way you describe it, you were in charge of the collections department, which is a logistics type job.
Correct.
Right? Which is the collections, meaning the objects of art themselves and
the artifacts,
the jade and the samurai suits and all of the amazing, precious things that you were, the paintings, whatever, sculpture, everything. Right. But that last role, deputy director of the whole museum, is a people job.
It's absolutely a people job. People, vision, strategy.
And that's a big arc from the one type of job. It's really one whole type of job to another whole type of job. Right.
Absolutely.
So, do you have, when you tell people that, do you say what made the difference, or did you experience it that way, that you were one whole way and that you became another way? Or how do you think of that evolution in yourself?
I think of it as definitely some breakthroughs. And I also think of it as some grooming. Amy saw something in me and brought in Dorrier Underwood to bring it out of me. And it absolutely happened. There was a combination of techniques being applied, both the leadership work that Dorrier Underwood is heavily rooted in and offers to people, that being paired with the introspective work on, Amy calls it contemplative leadership. This is basically mindfulness, but it pairs very well with the work that Dorrier Underwood does, I found, on accessing yourself and working on yourself.
It's interesting what you're saying there about how Amy groomed you, because
how it felt.
Well, in my own experience, I can relate that I didn't think of myself 15 years ago as the role that I'm in now, but somebody did. Somebody else did. And that's a real moment in one's development when you decide to listen to the voice of someone else who sees a future for you that you can't really see for yourself. You know, when they start talking to you about, oh, you could do this, your brain is saying, no, I can't. I've never done anything like that. What are you even talking about? Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, it's fascinating. I can remember a couple of points. One, specifically my from the beginning, my main coach I was working with was Gary. And I remember my first, major promotion out of tactical work and into strategic work. And it was becoming the director of exhibitions. And it was my special project, actually. That was the goal of my special project from Mastery. And I remember sitting there at a table with Gary and the leadership team and saying, here we are. And I've, in a sense, I've completed that project and I've received the outcome, the at stake for this. And I was like, I was kind of surprised. I don't know that I've ever stopped to think about it that way. It's really shocking to me and it's really incredible. And I looked over at Gary because I kind of held him as the person who brought it about. And of course, that's not how he sees it. And he looks at me and he's not shocked at all. And in fact, he almost looks a little disappointed in me. And he's just like, when are you going to get the power of your word? And I was like, wow, you're right. I made some declarations. Like there's some stuff I did here that people were grooming me and showing me how to do, but I wouldn't have known to do it otherwise. But there's power that people are seeing in you that you aren't seeing in yourself. And I've had a few breaks. I had another breakthrough recently. I emailed Gary about this. Actually, I'm reading a book called Co-Active Coaching. And there's a paragraph in there that I sent to Gary in a recent email. And it's about how the coach's job is to not like do something to their coachee. They're there to facilitate, like it's in the coachee. The coachee is whole and capable of all this. And I think I'm so used to externalizing it. Somebody's grooming it or somebody else is responsible for this. And seeing it in the book that's made for the coach's eyes, not the coachee's eyes, it just had me like recontextualize a whole history there of like, wow, these are a lot of things that I can't take full credit for by any means, but I can take a bit more credit for than I have been. And that's a breakthrough. That's a big breakthrough.
The whole idea. Yeah, the whole idea of credit is interesting here because it seems that that's the tendency we have to get over, is to have it be that there's credit involved. Because I think what we're both sharing is that when we stop listening to ourselves, which sounds un-American, you know, we should be trusting ourselves and, you know, reaching deep within us because we have what it takes. Okay, great. That's one point of view. But the other point of view is that you're an empty vessel. You have no freaking idea. You have no experience. You should be tapping into the wisdom of the ages. You should look around you to see what other people think are your strengths and maybe consider they have a more objective view and that you could pursue best what others see for you as your potential than to, dramatically cling to your own image of your own potential just because that's what you came up with by yourself.
Yeah. I think in the Co-Active book, they talk about this as the power resides in the relationship, not in either of the individuals. And that's where the coach is feeding power into and the coachee, but that's also where the coachee is withdrawing power from. It's not from themselves necessarily. There's not a credit system. There's like, you're building up this relationship and that is where it is stored. I think it's kind of like the theory the Otto Schwarmer stuff. Release, find a way to get the egos out of the room. And then what can all that coalesce, right? And it's not about, it's 40% on this side of the table and 60% on this side of the table. It's like, what can we coalesce if we stop thinking about it in those terms at all? What power lies there?
That's great. And so you can hear in your voice the leadership breakthrough that you had, which is a breakthrough from seeing things only inside of your specific individual accountability and more from the perspective of the organization, or even the organization's place in the community and thereby in the world. And so that led you to move on to where you are now at the Minnesota Street Project, which interestingly is not in Minnesota, right?
Right. It's on Minnesota Street in San Francisco.
Okay, so you're in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And what is the Minnesota Street Project about? How does it tie in with what we were just talking about, your journey?
Yeah, the Minnesota Street Project is an incredibly unique organization. It's a mission-based organization that exists it's almost an experiment to create a sustainable arts ecosystem that provides artists, art galleries, almost anywhere when you think of the arts, almost anything those things can reach out and touch on, whether that be the artists themselves, the gallerists trying to show the art, the community coming to appreciate the art or be a part of the art, or the programming that takes place around those artworks. The Minnesota Street Project facilitates all of that by providing at below market value studios to artists, gallery spaces to show public exhibition spaces. There's even a funding system with the Institute of Contemporary Art San Francisco that just opened up on our campus as well. And beyond that, there's an art services branch, which services clients essentially, that employs artists, make sure that they have sufficient healthcare, paid a living wage, make sure that they're respected and can live with dignity in the Bay Area, because the Bay Area is a very expensive place to live. And a lot of people don't correlate expensive places to live with great, thriving artist communities. Maybe great, a lot of amounts of art, but not necessarily a lot of artists.
Our patrons.
That's right. Patrons only. So San Francisco can't have a thriving art community if nobody is putting into the artists and just the patrons.
Wow. And so you mentioned campus. What do you mean? I'm wanting to picture what you're describing here.
I say campus because around Minnesota Street, there's a lot of buildings. There's a building of 40 studios. There's a building of, I think, somewhere between 13, maybe around a dozen galleries. There's exhibition spaces. There's multiple warehouses for the art services branch. There's like I said, the Institute for Contemporary Art San Francisco. There's a lot of different buildings all in the same area. And we call it the campus, although it's not a traditional campus.
And tell us about the visionary that you're working with that saw all this as being possible.
Andy and Deborah Rappaport are the principals, the owners, and visionary is the great word. This is not the type of thing that was just going to happen anyways, right? Yeah. They're not following a model. There's not something else you can point to and be like, oh, it's going to work because this other thing that has existed has proven that this works. It's a full-on experiment from somebody who has strong commitments to a vision of something being a way that, standing in the face of no results, just being away. I'm going to have this, I'm going to make some strong declarations and bring in something about.
Yeah. And that's a big part of our leadership is our leadership education is what you're referring to there. The idea that you stand for something without evidence, prior to evidence, that you make a declaration before you know exactly how it can be done.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite conversations that comes up with Andy quite a bit is we'll be talking about either why something doesn't work, and we'll be pointing to other models, well, this is what they do. This is how they get that to work. And he's like, we're not trying to do what they do. It's like a constant reminder. We're doing something brand new, completely different. So I appreciate us looking to other models, but I intentionally don't want it to look like that.
Yes.
It's it's a constant reminder of, we're doing something really, really visionary.
And so when you think about your own journey, bringing leadership now to this kind of cutting edge organization, tell me about what you've learned about leadership. You said to me that you think of it as being two tools that you've used there, or you think of it that way to yourself, that you have two tools to produce the kind of you that you want, if you will. Yeah,
thanks. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I've been thinking about leadership ever since my work began with Dorrier Underwood, just because the way y'all present it is so fascinating to me. And it's endless. You never stop thinking about it and learning from it. But my current fascination is around there's two sort of things you can look at, two sort of tools when you're designing your own leadership. And just like anything, there's practices you have to develop. There's investment you have to make in something if you want to get from it. And those two tools exist. One is just the instrument, the person themselves. It's the me that's sitting here with you talking right now, Doug. And I cultivate that tool by taking care of it, making sure I'm getting a good night's sleep, making sure I'm eating healthy, making sure I'm taking care of the physical needs of that instrument, but also by leadership practices, these distinctions that Dorrier would teach us about: 100% responsibility, making sure I'm being accountable to my word, making sure I have integrity, making sure that when I give my word to something, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it how I said I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it by the time I said I was going to do it. Sounds simple, but these types of practices are not as simple as they sound, especially if you want to do it as much as possible. You really want to be in integrity with this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of practices that you're familiar with.
And so that's the first tool you're saying is your own honing one's own instrument, like your own body, your own mind.
Yes, your own body and mind, flexing those muscles, working out that instrument. And then there's a second tool that I don't know that we're not quite as conscious of how we're feeding into it or how we're investing in it. And it's almost like a spiritual bank, or I think that you and I in our previous conversation have called it like a higher self of sorts. And as you develop these practices, you're investing in that higher self in a way that you aren't necessarily sure when it's going to come into play. And that's in the court, in the moment, a term I've heard before in sports, like flow state. It's when you are being your leadership, being used by those practices. Yeah. And to me, that's really the highest execution of leadership, is that moment. And it's not when you can just necessarily snap your fingers and say, now I'm ready to be this practice I've been cultivating. But it is one that, again, as you hone that instrument and you prepare it to be used and you store away in that higher self, those you cultivating the right circumstances for that to happen when it needs to, for that to manifest. That's really what I'm interested in right now. Like, that's something how do I keep working on that?
I'm talking with Danny Skinner of the Minnesota Street Project in San Francisco, and we've been talking about what it takes to ongoingly develop your own leadership. And you're providing a lot of leadership for that really entrepreneurial project for artists in the Bay Area. And I know that the vision of Andy Rappaport is that it would spread, that it's not just going to be a one-time thing there in San Francisco. Is that right?
Right now, we're focusing on San Francisco. I'm not sure exactly what spread means. I mean, we're always like trying to increase our outreach, like what it is that we can impact. We're trying to push that sphere, but I don't know that we're trying to like duplicate exactly what we have in other places.
More like the idea of it that a community needs to nurture its artists to be fully realized as a community. I'm going to Italy this summer, and we're going to Florence, of course. And that is an example of what you were talking about, right? That the wealthy, all the wealth was concentrated in Florence. So they had to do something to make it a place for artists.
Right.
Right. So it was one of the original artist colonies, I guess.
That's right. Artists can so easily and quickly be priced out of being able to afford to participate in communities that have benefited from their practices.
And so what about this idea of cultivating your own garden that you've talked about a number of times? You say that's the garden that you want to cultivate. And it has to do with practices, right? Like the same way you have practices of weeding or practices of planting. Is that the analogy?
Yeah, that works great. The garden I'm talking about is kind of, I guess, the self is an easy way to talk about it. And you become a leader just by paying attention to the garden of the self, because left to its own devices, it is what it is. We're just our machinery, our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And in many ways, we're so subject to those without having any control over how we respond and react in the world to those. And so picking up the gardening tools and looking at the garden and say, I'm going to clean this up is a huge leadership move on itself. And designing I can't do a lot about the weeds. They're going to come or something, or the rabbits or whatever, but I can do something. I can't get rid of all the pests in the world that are going to affect my garden, and I wouldn't want to, but I do want to learn how to deal with those appropriately. And I do want to learn to affect the outcome. I do want to be able to affect the future based on my commitments, my declarations. And so that's sort of what it looks like to get in and design a garden, as opposed to take the garden and let it be wild. And there may be some parts that you want to let be wild, and that may be part of your leadership decision as well. But it's really about designing that self.
And, people tuning in are finding us in a particularly philosophical mood, because both of us, let's be honest, have really gone through something traumatic recently. I've lost my father, and that's only a year after I lost my mother. And that's the kind of thing in my life, given my relationship with my father, that has rocked my world and made everything look different, and look out the window and the quality of the sunlight seems different and that sort of thing. And, I don't want to gloss over the fact that you've had a major traumatic event that really took you down and laid you out. So if it's not too personal, may I ask you to tell us that story?
Yeah, it's not too personal at all. It is very personal, but not too personal.
Yeah, okay, great.
I have, in a late September of last year, I was finding myself subject to uncontrollable, excruciating pain in the lower half of my body. And it would kind of onset for about 8 hours solid. And then I'd get about 8 hours of relief, onset for about 8 hours solid, get about 8 hours of relief. And while it was happening, I couldn't do really anything. The pain was so intense. It's not like I could get in the car and go to the hospital while it was happening. I couldn't even get off the ground while it was happening. I'd just go down in place and kind of scream, maybe cry for hours at a time. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And it took about 6 weeks for doctors to recognize or figure out what was going on.
Well, were you taken to the hospital in the interim? What was happening during those 6 weeks?
I went to the hospital. I went to the emergency room so many times in the first week that the emergency room doctors told me that I needed to stop coming. And it wasn't because they necessarily didn't believe me. That wasn't the words they said, but they did say, we can't do anything for you. There's no visible sign of injury, and we don't have a diagnosis. They were giving me pain medicine because the only thing they were sure of was pain. But the pain medicine wasn't having any effects because the pain wasn't a result of the type of things that the medicines were being prescribed to fix. It was a tumor inside my spine. So, and it was manifesting as, again, this pain in the full lower half of my body going into uncontrollable spasms of pain. And so they're trying to look at my legs, and we don't see it. There's no x-rays, there's no broken bones. It goes away. So it goes away and comes back. So it's very difficult to diagnose.
And it wasn't anything to see in the legs.
There wasn't anything to see. And the only way they eventually found anything was by conducting a couple of MRIs. And once they found what it was, they could see it's a tumor inside my spine, pressing on my nerves directly, and causing a different kind of pain than when you're in, it's not like when you hurt yourself under normal circumstances, there's a bunch of communication that goes on in your body, some signals identifying pain in the brain and then sending the pain signal back. This is like direct application of the pain signal from the nerve to the brain because of the tumor. So like pain medicine isn't getting in there in those pathways to stop that or help that.
Right.
And so 6 weeks of that, of not only going through that kind of those pain cycles, is a long time, definitely a traumatic experience on its own, but coupled with it being undiagnosed, like completely undiagnosed, puts you in a place of helplessness of, I can't be helped. I'm not going to be helped. They either don't believe me or they don't know what it is. They're not going to know. And so,
oh my gosh, Danny, I mean, it just sounds like psychological, as much as physical.
Oh, absolutely.
If not more, because it sounds like you're in a POW camp and they were trying to make you lose your mind.
And that's exactly what it felt like. Is the best thing I can think of to describe is it felt like torture because I knew it was coming back. I knew I couldn't avoid it. And all I could think about was, what am I going to do to either prepare for it or try to have it not happen? And, it's these 8-hour cycles for 6 weeks. I mean, it really breaks you down. And I'm in recovery for both those things for sure. I'm in physical recovery from the surgery that went into to fix it. And I'm in therapy for the emotional recovery.
Well, so clearly you're better that we would even be scheduling this and doing this at all. Okay. So I want the audience to be clear that you're sitting up straight, you're in a chair, you're moving around, you're smiling, you look great. This is not being conducted from your hospital bed. So tell us a little bit about the successful surgery. It sounds like it was unusual or not that unusual. Was it routine for them once they found what it was?
It was routine for the doctor, or at least he had lots of experience for it. But I know that it's not a super common thing, what I had to happen to people. The surgery, they go in to your spine. They have to take out parts of the bone in your actual spine. They have to peel back muscle groups and kind of get into the nerves in a way that disrupts all of the major systems. So it's a pretty invasive surgery, and recovery is, they told me to expect six months to 2 years before I'm fully recovered. Although I'm 4 months past.
4 months now.
This or next week will be my 4-month mark. And I've come a long, long way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And not just physically, but emotionally. And again, I spent a lot of time. I couldn't work for several months, and I spent a lot of time after the trauma, and I guess in the trauma, thinking about the kind of things you might predict someone might be thinking about when they get that close to their own mortality.
Yeah.
What am I doing? What is my life about? Who am I even? My emotions had been so rocked and my psychology so rocked, I didn't recognize the thoughts in my own head. And instead of just letting the dust settle, I'd already had this skill of cultivating the garden. I thought, well, here I am in a position again to build this up in a way as opposed to just having it be what it's going to be. And I got to have a hand in redesigning who I'm going to be. And I was fascinated by that prospect. And I spent a lot of time writing and thinking and just in the space of design while I was out. And I still am in that space. I'm still riding that wave, and I hope to be able to ride it for a long time. I was overwhelmed by a lot. Still am. Moments of pain that I don't have a lot of control over. They're nowhere near like what they were before. It's recovery pain. It's not pain from the tumor. Moments of emotion that I don't have a lot of control over. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Out of the blue, I'll be either, maybe very sad or very compassionate about something I see makes me very sad about that. Yes. I can get scared if I hear a sound behind me. I like my natural animal instincts to protect my back.
Interesting.
And those are kind of predictable results in a way. But one of the very unpredictable results is I found myself in tears frequently, overwhelmed with gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
shocked. Why is this in the mix?
Yeah.
And it started with real simple things. Like right after surgery, I would be in bed almost all the time. Couldn't even put on my socks without my wife's help. Couldn't touch my face to brush I couldn't do hardly anything for a good while. And so just being able to sit on the front porch and feel the sun on my skin after like 2 weeks, there I am crying in gratitude about the sun on my skin.
Yeah.
And there's the moment where you're just in the moment. And then there's the moment where you're thinking about the moment. And then when I'm thinking about the moment, like when I'm in the moment, it's great. The sun on my skin, obviously so great. I'm crying. But then when I'm thinking about the moment, I'm going, I don't usually cry about this. Who am I? What's going on? And then I think whatever is going on, I want to hold on to that.
Yeah.
I want to be the person who can get so grateful about the sun on their skin that it brings tears to their face. Things like that were happening a lot. And I've been digging into gratitude.
This is where I can totally feel you, because with Dad's passing, I suddenly, get really moved by a tree. And I don't exactly know why, but it's very real. And in some ways, it's a lot more real than my work commitments and the documents I'm working on and the meetings I need to plan.
Yep, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things about that I've discovered from studying gratitude as deeply as I have over these past few months, there's a lot of interesting things, but one of them at least is it's not something that you can necessarily bring to the world. It's something that you can be 100% responsible for yourself in a way, but there's nothing I can try, but there's nothing I can really do to have someone else be grateful. It's out of my control. And even to the person who is feeling grateful, that kind of feels out of their control too. Because I know I don't get to decide what I'm grateful for. At least in the moment, that's what it feels like. I have been working on a gratitude practice, especially when I'm upset, which happens a lot as part of recovery from trauma. And I've seen successes in that have it to where now I have gratitude about even my trauma, because it's brought me to a place where I can be used by gratitude, just like we talked about, cultivating that being used by my practice of building up the correct circumstances to feel gratitude. Again, I don't necessarily decide in that moment to be grateful, but I've been working on this long enough that I'm used by gratitude more and more and more frequently, as opposed to being used by upset.
Yes.
As opposed to being used by fear or pain. And it doesn't mean fear and pain aren't there, but it means that in those moments, I'm being used by gratitude as well. And that's something that wasn't happening before.
It's interesting what you said about not controlling your gratitude, because there's so many books and calendars and things that say gratitude. You plan your gratitude. You look and you make sure your gratitude is intentional, in other words. And you're not saying anything about that, but you're saying that the gratitude that you've been discovering is something that arises within you or arises from you, rather than being some cognitive act.
Right. And I think I'm kind of talking about both. So I'm glad you articulated that, because I think that practicing the cognitive act can lead to being used by it automatically.
So you're saying they go together, like having a gratitude practice then it goes with having this natural occurring of gratitude. Like, in other words, you just find yourself being grateful without saying now it's time to do my gratitude practice. Right. There's that too. Yes. But then you're saying you're really finding yourself in the presence of gratitude.
Yes. But I'm also taking responsibility for when it's not there, and cognitively doing the practice intentionally. I think a good example of this, I do a lot of writing about gratitude. I think a good example of this, one of the writings that I did is talks about sleeping was very difficult for me for a long time, because when I'm on my back for too long in any one position, it hurts, but also when I move, it hurts. And sleeping is just a combination of both those things all the time. And I was in bed and woke up because my dog was scratching my back. I sleep in the bed with the dog. I love my dog so much. And he was scratching my back. My back, it hurts. It's very sensitive. It's a shocking way for me to wake up in a lot of fear and pain and upset.
Yeah.
And I had to stop myself pretty quickly, because I am practicing this. This wasn't automatic. And say to myself, what is going on? I understand I'm upset. It's okay to be upset. What is there to be curious about right now? That's beyond that upset. What is there to be grateful for?
Wow.
And it led me to think about, obviously my dog is not trying to hurt me. My dog must be having a dream. They squirm around in their dreams. They move their legs, and that must be what's happening. And then I thought, what is there to be curious about here? Because I'm still in a lot of fear and upset. I thought, what do a dog dream about? Now it's getting more fascinating, right? Like, my dog is dreaming. What is he dreaming about? What do dogs dream about at all? Isn't that interesting? And I thought, well, he's probably dreaming about playing with who? I just keep going down this rabbit hole. And I realized my dog is probably dreaming about playing with me, because I'm his world. He loves me as much as I love him. And so now you see, this inquiry has led me to a place where I'm about to cry again. Because instead of thinking about how upset or hurt I am, I'm thinking about how much I love this creature and how much this creature loves me. And we're sleeping in a bed together, which is totally unnatural and weird. And I go back to sleep with a smile on my face, as opposed to being up all night upset or whatever. And so that's an example of what the practice can look like in the moment.
That's great. Just so you know, speaking of practices, we allow the dog to sleep in our bed as well. Full disclosure. So, Danny, it's been great talking to you. And I know there's more that we could say here. I just want to wish you really well in your continued recovery, because I can hear you're still in the middle of it. And just thank you for being willing to stop and in the middle of your life and share with people for the good of that, whatever good may come of that. And I really appreciate your generosity.
Thank you for listening to Empowering Leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to subscribe for free on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a rating and a review so that other leaders like yourself can find us. Sign up for Dorrier Underwood's email newsletter by visiting us at dorrierunderwood.com. Dorrier Underwood serves visionary companies who are serious about realizing their dreams and who are unwilling to settle for incremental results. Our clients are looking for breakthrough results and a deeper sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. To learn more, visit us at dorrierunderwood.com. That's it for now. Go forth and be amazing and take good care of your people. Empowering Leadership is produced by Dorrier Underwood and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.